Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about books, and today we're not talking about Malazan at all. Well, later on, probably more opposite the throne, but right now we're talking about something else, and this will be a bit of a three-part series, I guess, something like that. That I'm really excited to do, because I want to talk about two novels that one of them is a bit older, well, like from last year. One of them will be coming out today, well, I mean tomorrow, because I'm recording this on Monday night. One of them is The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, which is what we're going to talk about today. The other one is Termination Shock by Neil Stephenson, which, as I said, will be coming out tomorrow. I've got it pre-ordered and I'll jump in immediately because I've been a huge Neil Stephenson fan ever since I first read Snow Crash back in the day. And then in a third video, I guess we'll talk about comparing those two. That's sort of the idea. Why do I want to do this? There's a bunch of reasons for that. The first one is obviously those two novels have basically the same topic, at least as far as I can tell. Because obviously I have not read Termination Shock, so could be very different. But from the synopsis and everything, both novels deal with climate change and how we as humans could possibly deal with it. And that's an important topic, right? So I figured we'll have a look at those and compare those two, and that's sort of where we're going to go with this. I assume they'll be very different, politics-wise, definitely, so this will be an interesting aspect, and then looking at the general function of science fiction literature in current political debates and stuff like that, which is something that I really, I'm interested in. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. Let's do this, shall we? No? Cheers. So, I'll do the usual thing. I'll talk about it spoiler-free for a while, and then I'll go into spoiler discussions later on, and I'll let you know when we cross over into spoiler territory, so you can then decide to step off if you feel like it. In general, I would say there aren't that many spoilers in this book. And there's reasons for that, which is what we're going to talk about today. So, what is this book? When did it come out? It came out last year. Kim Stanley Robinson is certainly one of the established, more hard sci-fi writers around right now. I haven't read that much Kim Stanley Robinson. I've read the Mars trilogy, I think, and one or two others I can't remember right now. But I'm definitely not as well versed in Robinson's corpus as I am with all the works of Neil Stephenson, but that should not be a problem. So it came out last year. It made something of a splash. The publisher is advertising it as one of Barack Obama's most important books of the year, which, has a certain irony, because if he agrees with all the stuff that KSR is putting in this book, the question is why didn't he do anything like the likes during his presidency? Well, that's a different question, and we're not going to go into right now. The point is, it is a story of climate change and how humanity deals with climate change, told as a mosaic of a lot of different narratives, shorter ones, different voices. It's a bit of a patchwork of all kinds of things, and there's reasons for that are really interesting. It is, compared to a lot of other novels or science fiction novels, not not a very gripping read. There are obviously plot lines in there that have human elements and all of that stuff going on, but those are not the main focus of this book. In that regard, it is much closer to something like Isaac Asimov's Foundation and stuff like that. It feels more like a classic sci-fi where you deal with a technological problem or speculate on how humanity will solve a specific issue in the future. It's more like a broad picture kind of story. And I suspect in that regard it will be different from what we'll see in Termination Shock. The main plot line is around the so-called Ministry for the Future, which is a UN kind of connected to UN and kind of connected to the Paris climate change, Paris Climate Agreement organization that is trying to mitigate the effects of climate change through all kinds of policies, science, and whatnot. And this is sort of the main thrust of this book, is that if we want to survive climate change, and yes, climate change is real, we have to do something about it really, really fucking quickly. Robinson is looking at like all kinds of options, in which regard, there's people that think it's about, new technologies. Other people are like, no, we need to just like stop burning carbon immediately. There's all kinds of options, right? And Robinson explores all kinds of possible technological solutions for climate change, but also policy changes, changes in the financial system, in the global market, the global economy, all of these aspects. And there's a reason for that, because the main thrust of Kim Stanley Robinson's argument in this novel will be that this is a global problem. This is a problem that is not just about science. It's not just about technology. It is about all the aspects of human life and human nature interactions and all of these things. So it will have to be, it will have effects on all of these aspects. There's a lot of plot lines or elements about refugees from climate change, from conflicts that are a result of climate change, and how we deal with refugee crises. There is obviously questions of like how to actually help nature or certain aspects of both flora and fauna to survive with and cope with the effects of climate change. There is aspects on of like how we need to change the global market, the global economy, the global financial system in the near future to adapt to all the knock-on effects of climate change. All of these things are told through all kinds of different aspects of different smaller bits and pieces. There's one major through line, which is the story of the head of the so-called Ministry for the Future, called Mary Murphy, and we follow her like arc as head of that organization to the end of that, of her tenure there, and that's sort of like a through line. There's other characters that show up again and again, but it's more like a panoramic view, more like a kaleidoscope of different bits and pieces and narratives in there that make up the whole of this novel. And I personally like that. But I can see that this can be a kind of story that if you're the kind of reader that is very much focused on characters, on character development, and on plot events, this will be a hard read. It sometimes reads more like a political pamphlet or a political manifesto or a scientific essay. It reads like, in parts, like these kind of things, because it really is also that. Because it's one of those things that classic science fiction or speculative fiction does, right? Is like sit down and look at how things could change and how things could be in the future. And what I really appreciate about this one is that it is not about painting a dystopian picture. Now, in science fiction, dystopias have been very, very popular over the last half century, I would say. There's always been more positive science fiction out there, but it's not been that much. Neil Stephenson is someone who has tried to do stuff like that with, for example, Seven Eves and things like that, to look at how, things could actually be different, or how we actually could overcome specific things. But then again, the influence of cyberpunk has had, like, long effects on science fiction. Another possible author of like non-dystopian science fiction that would be interesting to talk about is obviously Ian M. Banks. But that's like far future utopias. That's a different thing than what we're dealing with here. This is near future, rooted firmly in current events, in current projects, in current aspects of our world, and that can also make it hard to read, I assume. It's like, now, I mean, this is like another part that makes this book great for me, is like Kim Stanley Robinson's politics, at least as far as I can perceive them through this novel, which is, well, they are very obvious here, because like dealing with climate change and how we should like change our society in the near future is by its actual nature a political question, just as like most, if not all, science fiction literature is by its nature a form of political literature, because you're talking about like how the universe will be in the future, and you either decide that it will be good or bad, or you paint a specific change as good or bad. So that is always a political field. So Kim Stanley Robinson's politics are closer to where I would probably put my own politics. But if you already if you as a reader still for some reasons have problems with accepting man-made climate change, this will not be a read for you, or it may just be a very eye-opening read for you. Who knows? But you need to accept these fundamental ideas before you go into this book. Otherwise, you'll just sit there and like, well, fuck's he want from me? The other part is, if you think that the current like global market system, capitalism, the way it runs these days, is a good thing, you will also have some nasty shocks in here, because Kim Stanley Robinson, in the way he deals with the near future, thinks that we need to change our like economic systems and move away from the form of consumer capitalism that we have right now. These are just like basic themes in here, which is why I don't consider them actual spoilers. These are just like aspects of a current political debate on how we should deal with climate change that he takes and runs with. And I personally tend to agree with these ideas, that the way the capitalist system works right now is not sustainable in the, well, not really in the short run, but far less even in the long run. And we need to figure out how to slowly move away from that to different economic systems. The other part is obviously the idea that, yes, climate change, man-made climate change, is something that will lead to huge migrations, because parts of the earth will become uninhabitable. Those people will go somewhere else. There will be new conflicts around that. There will be new refugees, and there is the question what to do with these refugees. Now, Kim Stanley Robinson is someone who goes, yeah, we in the rich West need to do something about that, because a lot of this climate change is the result of colonialism and our Western, Northern, whatever you want to call it, North Hemisphere kind of exploitation of, say, large parts of Africa and parts of Asia through colonialism, through imperialism. That's why those places are so fucked. So it is kind of on us to deal with the consequences of that and bear a larger burden there. Now, that will obviously lead to all kinds of political problems, but it's also on us to actually solve those. So this is part of what makes this book so good, and I can kind of see why it is praised by the likes of someone like Barack Obama. It's like it kind of takes all these aspects into account. A lot of the general like identities, how national or cultural identities will impact how we deal with climate change, how we deal with the general problems of the future. And this is a global novel. This takes place all over the place, with like one storyline obviously set in Zurich, which why not, if you really want to. But there's large parts are about other places like India. A lot of it is about India, which makes a lot of sense. There's stuff on Antarctica because that's where glaciers break down, shit like that. So there's that aspect to it. And there are stories set in Africa. There's stories set in South America. There's it's all over the place, and that I feel is important to understand here as well. So yeah, this is certainly also a post-colonial novel dealing with a lot of these aspects of identities, how certain cultures feel or still, work under the assumption that they have less respect from, or less, or less respected or treated like equals by the old big dogs, which being, Europe and America mostly. How that can influence stuff. And this is one specific plot line, or like line of events that Robinson deals with here, is the part about India, because he starts the book with a massive heat wave that kills several million people in India in 1 week, and what that does to the Indian identity, to the Indian society, and how it changes and becomes part of the motor, of the global motor for change against, for change and to fight climate change. And you look at like heat waves of the last couple of years, like this year in North America, for example. You're like, yeah, you know what? He's got a point there. These things will become harder and harder. So we can kind of see that a catastrophe of that level will maybe lead to some action. Because this is another aspect of this novel that I personally understand, and I think makes it worthwhile reading, is that a lot of it is permeated by the frustration of people that know that things have to change and are fighting against systems that are too slow, too entrenched, too happy with the status quo to change anything. The frustration that we kind of knew that this was coming and we should do something about it, and haven't done for already like 40 years, is a huge part of this novel. And while it has something of a, at least openly, maybe slightly positive end, and there's a sort of route through at least the next couple of like decades of climate change drawn out through this novel, developed through this novel, it is clear that it will come at extremely high costs, both in human lives and in general, like, damage to our planet, to our biosphere, which is once again an important aspect of this novel, and rather realistic. And as I said, the rage that it could have been avoided, or it could have been much easier to change things, and we have fucked it up already, is something that goes, like, runs through the entirety of the book. And as I said, it's something that I personally understand really well, and I personally vibe with, so to speak. But I can understand that this will also make other possible readers angry. So be aware of that. Go into it with an open mind. But this is not a book on the pros and cons of whether there is climate change. This is a book that says climate change is happening right now. We should have started doing something about it 40 years ago. How can we still kind of survive the whole thing? Because we already fucked it up real bad. That's the setup. If you already disagree with that, this will be a hard read. Even if you kind of know it, it will still be a hard read. And this is where I see the main power of this novel. And the main power of this novel is that it does something that fiction can do, that apparently our general media cannot do. What do I mean by that? I mean that we living here in, say, like me, in the global West, with like social media, international mass media, all that stuff. We know about things like climate change. We know in our heads that like refugee crises are exacerbated by climate change. We have known for a long time, but we've also gotten really good at ignoring it, not thinking about it too hard. Which, of course, makes sense. It's a coping mechanism. If we would sit down and think about how fucked up our world is every single day, we'd like be stuck in despair all the time and probably not get anything done. Or just, at least often, and for a lot of us, that is the case. So you kind of put it in a box, you compartmentalize, you're like, rationally, I know there's shit going on. Rationally, I know people in, the Middle East are suffering. People in Syria are suffering. People in North Africa are suffering. And we, as, the West, are to blame in part for that case, for that fact. We kind of know that stuff on a rational level, but it doesn't trigger any action with us. It doesn't do that in a lot of cases. Now, obviously, with stuff like Fridays for Future and whatnot in the last year, 2 years, because obviously the plague then kind of hit and did all kinds of other stuff to us. There are people who stand up for it, but for a lot of us, it has been our habit to ignore tragedies, compartmentalize, and put them on the back burner. But this is fiction, and we engage with fiction in a different way. That's why we read fiction, right? We go and read books to feel, to suffer, to be happy with these characters, to, live vicariously through those characters. Something that we don't do with another report on the TV or in some newspaper, but we do it with fiction. So while Kim Stanley Robinson is not exactly describing anything that is extraordinary or unrealistic or whatever, but things that are happening every single fucking day already, he can reach us. He can reach our, it's important. The book can reach us on, reach our emotions and maybe trigger something there to actually make us think hard about it, think and maybe act on it. And that's something that fiction can reach here, that just another non-fiction book on how bad it is in the world will probably not be able to do, because fiction can reach other parts of our brains, of our hearts, of our minds, of our souls. And that's what this book attempts to do and possibly will achieve. So that's what makes this book so depressing to read in a lot of cases, at least for the first half. There's also obviously a lot of speculative fiction, ideas of technologies that we could use or should use. The idea that geoengineering will be something that we have to try if we want to save our coastlines and stuff like that. These things are also in here, and these are the bits that are classic science fiction, that are your really basic classic science fiction of Asimov or Clarke level of how to write stories. Plus, obviously, there is this awareness of how international relations work, how the United Nations work or don't work, and why they don't work, how specific political systems work and engage with each other. There's a lot of politics in this book that deals with a lot of these things, but it can all be boiled down to a few very basic tenets. One of them is that every human being deserves dignity, and dignity is something that other humans give them. That our current system is not exactly making it easy for us to give for every human being to have this form of dignity and respect, but mostly dignity. Another part is that we need to, come together as a species. Don't see us as different parts of humanity, but think of this as a pan-human, general problem, and also as a, universal problem. This is something that we can only change if we think of our entire biosphere as one thing and us as part of it, not as the people that are just, taking everything they can and leaving the rest to rot. If we don't do that, if we don't think about the entire biosphere as one thing and us as part of it, we'll probably be fucked. Plus, because we have waited so long, it's already going to take a lot of effort that goes way beyond just burning less, fossil fuel. There's other stuff that we need to figure out. How to change the global transport system, to not fly, to maybe use sailing ships again for global transport, these kind of ideas, which, individually are ideas that we can sit down and discover and, debate and discuss and figure out what is doable, what is not doable. But at least we should get down to business and actually start trying things. And that's the other big message of this novel, which I do appreciate. And once again, this is a collective effort. That's the other part that we see here. This is something that it will not be led by individual billionaires with technology and funds to do something. No, this is something that will only work if we actually get our economic situations also fixed. That's the other part of it that I guess will be difficult for some people to stomach. So yeah, this is generally what I really appreciate about this book, and I assume this is still very much spoiler free because it's kind of all in the title and the first couple of pages. So, should you read it? Hell yeah, of course you should. Do I give it stars and whatnot? No, because I don't rate books. I rate monasteries. No, that's not true. Point is, yeah, you should go and read it. It's very much a book that will have a huge impact on you. So now let's look about, at a few individual things that maybe didn't work out so well, on a few things that I think worked out really well, and just like individual bits and pieces, which I would consider sort of spoilery. All right, there's one major theme that I still have some issues with, and that is the weird, relationship of Mary Murphy, the president of the Ministry of the Future, and Frank, whatever Frank May is, I think May was, well, that guy. So to put him on, Frank May is our first character. He survives the Indian heat wave, has massive PTSD from that, tries to become an activist or even a terrorist, an eco-terrorist. And at some point, he kidnaps Mary Murphy. After that, she, once he gets, captured and whatnot, she starts to develop a friendship to him. And I feel it just kind of felt a bit off. It's handled very tactfully, but it's not what I would, I don't know, it just made me slightly uncomfortable. Now, obviously, Robinson does something really clever with that whole story when we have, in a way, Frank stand in a way for the planet, and we see with Frank's staff later on how it could also go with the planet in a way. So there is that, and I appreciate that, but it just fell a bit off. A few other bits and pieces are really cool though, like how we talk about the idea of gender with this small bit aside of one of Murphy's co-workers there, Janus Athena, where it's very made clear that they are non-binary, and that's sort of the idea there. And that is not exactly how we should deal with that kind of thing. Another one is obviously how countries like India and others are, feeling that they should actually handle their own problems when they don't want Frank to come back and join that eco-terrorist group in India. I understand those aspects. It is still a bit sad that we have a book like this written by someone from a globally Western background. But I guess that's just something that we'll have to deal with for now. So there's that. What else was... I don't know. I did very much appreciate Robinson's idea of giving us very, very lush descriptions of fauna, of just nature's beauty. as to make it clear that there is a good reason to save the planet. It's not just human survival. It's just that, like animals and nature is worth saving just because it is so beautiful. And that's another thing that I personally really appreciate, but I can see that it may become tedious for some people because there's like large swaths in there that are just like descriptions of nature. And if you don't go in for that kind of thing, they might just bore you. But I appreciate it. It reminded me a bit of Terry Pratchett's and Stephen Baxter's Long Earth books, which I don't really like that much, but they go in for the same kind of thing because they're sort of, exploring a specific idea and making, putting like actual plot development and like character development very much on the back burner in these books. So it does kind of remind me of that in a way. But as I said, I can see it actually serving a larger purpose here, which is to reopen our eyes to the beauty of our entire planet, no matter which part of it. What else? Well, I personally appreciate it a lot. There's a lot of like bashing of bankers and the market. I can, however, see that this may be for some people a bit too on the nose. As I said, I do already believe those kind of things, so for me it was like, wow, cool, someone is actually writing that outside of angry posts in social media, so hey, that's pretty cool. I did appreciate that. I felt that maybe in parts, like especially when it comes to like those scenes in North America, there's the US, they may have been like a bit too over the top when it comes to describing that as like super backwards. But then again, if the last couple of years have taught us anything, it is that yes, people are like becoming more extreme in their beliefs already. So just using that and putting it a bit more, turning it up to 11 because we're also talking about the future, is guessing that that trend to towards polarization in our societies will continue. Now, that is obviously not that far-fetched. Now, a small minor niggle that I still have is that Frank lives apparently for years undercover in Switzerland and does not work any job, but can still survive apparently relatively easily. It's like it's never really made clear where he's getting money from, which, I don't know, sounds a bit weird to me. But then again, as I said, like realism on the personal level seems not to be the goal of the novel, so I guess I can overlook it in this novel, in this case. I assume these things will be all very, very different in Termination Shock, which I'll start reading tomorrow, immediately when it comes out, because I've been, as I said, like I'm a Neil Stephenson fanboy, even though I probably won't agree with his politics as much. Anyway, these are sort of my thoughts on The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson from last year. Go read it, and if you have read it, tell me in the comments what you thought about it. And we can have us a discussion on it, and I'll get back to you once I've read Termination Shock, and then we'll do a bit of a comparison and shit. Anyway, that's it for now. Have a great day. I'll talk to you later. Cheers.